Good evening, and welcome to History for Your Sleep. You're safe here, and you can let your mind settle for a moment. Take a slow, comfortable breath and allow the day to loosen its weight around you. If these calm journeys bring you peace, you may subscribe whenever it feels right, quietly, naturally, without any hurry at all. Now, a gentle story begins. Tonight, we step into the ancient Inca world, a land of high mountains and deep valleys, stone roads stretching across the Andes, terraced fields catching the last light of day, and quiet footsteps moving through cool mountain air. A place where life followed the rhythm of the sun and seasons, where homes clung to slopes and ridges, and where daily routines unfolded in small, steady patterns among farmers, messengers, families, and travelers. Let us wander there, slowly, softly, and let the Inca world rise around us in the calm of the night. Morning comes early in the Andes, not because people hurry, but because the mountains allow no delay. Before the sun fully clears the peaks, cold air still rests in the valleys. Stone terraces hold frost in their shadows. Breath is visible. The land feels awake long before the people are. This is the world the Inca lived in. High above sea level, where the air is thin and the nights are sharp, daily life begins quietly. No bells, no calls, just movement. Slow, practiced, and necessary. Most people do not wake in cities. They wake in small villages, spread across slopes and valleys, connected not by streets, but by paths. These communities sit where farming is possible and survival is negotiable. Every location has been chosen carefully. Too low, and crops fail. Too high, and bodies weaken. The mountains decide first. People adapt second. Stone walls surround homes not for beauty, but for protection. Wind moves constantly. Temperatures shift quickly. What feels warm in sunlight becomes cold the moment shade passes over it. Life here teaches awareness. People step outside, wrapped in wool. Fires are checked. Animals breathe nearby. Llamas and alpacas wait quietly, already used to the cold. There is no sense of freedom in the morning. There is a sense of order. Work will come. It always does. The land does not belong to individuals. Fields are not owned. They are assigned, shared, and controlled. Everyone knows which plots they tend, which terraces they repair, which days they labor for themselves, and which days belong to the state. This is not negotiated, it is expected. The Andean world feels vast, but movement is limited. Most people will never leave their valley. Roads exist, but they are not for leisure, they are for obligation. Even at dawn, that pressure is present. Terraces stretch across slopes like steps carved into the mountain itself. These fields are engineering achievements, holding soil in place, managing water, creating narrow zones where crops can survive at extreme altitude. They are beautiful. They are also fragile. A season without rain, a sudden frost, a collapsed wall, any one of these can undo years of labor. When this happens, the state may help, or it may not. Survival often depends on stored food and whether redistribution reaches this village in time. People know this. That knowledge shapes how they move. Children are awake early, not because they are forced, but because work is shared. Carrying small loads, watching adults, learning by repetition. Childhood here is short, not cruel, but compressed. Women begin preparing food. Potatoes are sorted. Some have been freeze-dried into chuño during cold nights and stored for hard times. Others will be cooked today. Nothing is wasted. Food is not abundant. It is managed. Maize exists, but not everywhere. Quinoa fills gaps. Meat is rare. Hunger is familiar even in good years. Still, there is rhythm. Tasks repeat. Movements are known. Hands do what they have done thousands of times before. Above the village, mountains watch silently. They are not scenery. They are living presences. Each peak is an apu, a spirit with power. People offer small gestures of respect, a quiet word, a pause, a bit of food, not to ask for miracles, but to maintain balance. Balance matters more than comfort. Religion here is not dramatic, it is practical. It explains why the land gives and why it sometimes takes away. Fear exists, but it is contained. Fear of cold nights, fear of hunger, fear of displeasing forces larger than oneself. But fear does not stop work, it sharpens it. The Andean world is disciplined. People are observed by neighbors, by local leaders, by the expectations of the system itself. Privacy is minimal. Everyone knows their role. This creates stability. It also creates pressure. There is little room for refusal, little space for personal choice. Life moves forward because it must. As the sun rises higher, shadows retreat. The village fully awakes. Paths fill with movement. Stone warms underfoot. Another day begins, not free, not easy, but structured enough to survive. This is the Andean world at its most honest moment. Not at the height of empire, not in ceremony or conquest, but in the quiet morning when endurance begins again. In the Inca world, life did not begin with the empire. It began with the ayu. An ayu was not just a village, it was a living structure of families bound together by land, labor, memory, and obligation. To be born Inca meant to be born inside an ayu and to remain there for life. People did not choose where they lived, they belonged. Homes were grouped close together on mountain slopes or valley edges, not for comfort, but for survival. Wind was strong, cold arrived suddenly, distance made isolation dangerous. Living close meant help was always nearby. At dawn, movement began quietly. Doors opened, people stepped out into thin air and sharp light. No one needed to call others. Everyone already knew what the day required. In the ayu, routine replaced instruction. Fields were worked together, terraces repaired together, paths cleared together, food prepared in shared rhythms. This cooperation felt natural, necessary, even reassuring. But it also meant that nothing was private. Every action was visible, every absence noticed, every delay questioned. The ayu watched itself. Elders observed, local leaders counted, neighbors remembered. A person could not disappear into solitude. There was nowhere to hide. Even rest was seen. This constant presence created order and pressure. Children learned early that behavior belonged to the group. They learned when to speak, when to work, when to stay silent. Mistakes were not individual, they affected everyone. Because land was shared, labor was shared, responsibility was shared. The ayu protected its members, but it also bound them tightly. People worked land they did not own. Fields were allocated by the community and the state. What you harvested was not fully yours. Part went to the household, part to the ayu, part to the state and the gods. No one asked whether this was fair. Fairness was not the measure. Order was. Life here was predictable. Predictability meant survival. Innovation was rare. Standing out was risky. It was safer to repeat what worked. Days moved with the sun. Morning labor, short pauses, work again, evening preparation, fire, sleep, season after season. Festivals were rare breaks, moments when labor stopped and sound returned. Music, chicha, movement, then silence returned again. The Ayu absorbed joy quickly and returned to discipline. There was comfort in belonging. People were not alone. No one starved entirely while others ate. But there was also no escape. If the state demanded labor, the Ayu provided it. If people were relocated, the Ayu obeyed. If food was short, everyone endured it together. Loyalty was not optional, it was assumed. Community pressure replaced punishment, shame replaced force, memory replaced law. People learned to comply without being told. The Ayu shaped identity so deeply that personal desire mattered little. You were not you first. You were a worker, a family member, a contributor. This created resilience and submission. When illness came, neighbors helped. When a child died, the community mourned quietly. When an elder weakened, their knowledge remained valued. But grief did not pause labor. The fields still needed care, terraces still needed stone, the sun still rose. Life continued without permission. In this way, the Ayu taught endurance, not heroic endurance, not proud endurance, quiet endurance. People survived because they followed, because they repeated, because they accepted limits. Freedom was not a goal, stability was. From the outside, this looks harsh. From the inside, it was normal. The Ayu was the world. Beyond it lay mountains, cold, and uncertainty. So people stayed, they worked, they adapted, and in doing so, they carried the Inca world forward, not through conquest, but through repetition. As night approached, movement slowed, smoke drifted low, voices softened. The Ayu settled into itself again, and tomorrow would begin the same way. Not because people lacked imagination, but because survival depended on sameness. In the Inca world, a home was not a place of comfort. It was a place of endurance. Houses were built from stone or adobe, pressed tightly against the mountainside or settled into narrow valleys. Their shape was simple. Their purpose was clear: to keep the cold out, to keep the wind away, to survive the night. Most homes had a single room, no hallways, no separation, no privacy. Inside, life unfolded close together. Families slept on mats or animal skins laid directly on hard ground. Furniture was almost non-existent. Everything unnecessary was avoided, not by choice, by habit. A hearth burned inside the house. It provided warmth, it allowed food to cook, it kept the night from feeling endless. But it also filled the room with smoke. There were no chimneys. Smoke escaped slowly through doorways or small openings near the roof. Eyes burned. Lungs adapted. Children grew up breathing it daily. This was normal. The house did not protect from everything. Cold still crept in at night. Wind found cracks. Frost touched walls before dawn. People slept clothed. They woke stiff. They moved slowly at first. Morning always came with cold. Yet these homes endured earthquakes, rain, and time better than lighter shelters ever could. Stone mattered. Weight mattered. Stability mattered more than comfort. Houses were repaired often, walls adjusted, roofs re-thatched with grass. Nothing was permanent. Maintenance was part of daily life. A home was never finished, it was always being kept alive. Inside, space was shared, cooking, sleeping, weaving, storing food. Children learned early where to move and where not to. One wrong step could knock over tools or spill precious food. Carelessness was costly. Everything had a place. Everything had a reason. Houses were not silent during the day. There was the grinding of potatoes, soft conversation, the scrape of stone tools, the movement of wool between fingers. But at night, sound changed. The fire crackled quietly. Wind pressed against walls. Outside, the mountains held their silence. Darkness arrived quickly in the Andes, and with it, vulnerability. There were no lights beyond fire, no windows to watch the outside, no locks strong enough to stop fear. People believed spirits moved freely after sunset, that the mountains watched, that illness traveled unseen. So homes were kept close together, not just for warmth, for reassurance. A nearby presence mattered. To sleep alone was unsettling. To hear another fire crackling nearby was comfort. Homes reflected the Inca world itself, organized, restricted, protective, and demanding. They did not allow individuality, they supported continuity. The state did not design houses for beauty, it valued uniformity, predictability. Similar houses meant similar lives, similar expectations, similar obedience. A person's home showed their place in society. Simple materials meant simple status. Finer textiles or decoration marked difference, but rarely among common people. Most lived the same way. This sameness created stability. It also erased choice. A home was inherited with its limitations. You did not imagine a different one. You maintained the one you had. Illness happened here. Birth happened here. Death happened here. Bodies were prepared near the hearth. The living slept near the dead. Life and loss shared the same space. There was no separate room for grief. And yet, people endured. They adapted their breathing, their posture, their expectations. They learned to rest lightly, to conserve energy, to accept discomfort as background noise. A good home was not one that felt pleasant. It was one that lasted the winter, that did not collapse, that sheltered enough. In the Inca world, this was success. As night deepened, fires were fed sparingly. Fuel mattered. Warmth was managed carefully. Families drew closer. Voices lowered. Movement slowed. The house held. And that was enough. Morning in the Inca world did not arrive gently. It arrived inevitably. Before the sun fully cleared the mountain ridges, movement had already begun. Cold air filled the valleys. Breath was visible. Bodies rose from mats slowly, stiff from the night. There were no alarms, no calls, no hesitation. The day started because it had to. In the Andes, light was precious. Work followed the sun closely. To waste morning hours was to risk hunger later. People stepped outside into thin air and sharp brightness. Stone paths were cold under bare feet. The mountains stood unmoving, indifferent. There was no question of what needed to be done. Routine answered that. Morning work began immediately. Fields, terraces, animals, tools. Each person already knew their role. Children carried small loads. Women prepared food, tended fires, and began weaving. Men moved toward terraces, walls, and paths. Elders watched, corrected, remembered. No one supervised loudly. Control was quiet. The rhythm of labor was familiar, repetitive.
efficient. Terrace farming demanded constant attention. Stone walls had to be checked for cracks. Soil needed redistribution. Water channels cleared of debris. A single collapse could destroy weeks of work. At this altitude, mistakes were expensive. The body worked differently here. Breathing was shallow. Movements were measured. Pacing mattered more than strength. People learned not to rush. Rushing caused exhaustion. Exhaustion caused accidents. Mourning was for steady effort, not speed. Short pauses occurred naturally. A sip of water, a moment against stone. No long breaks. Time was not divided into hours, it was divided into tasks. When one was finished, another began. The state expected productivity, but it did not need to shout. Expectation lived inside people. From early childhood, individuals learned work was not punishment, it was duty, identity, moral worth. To work was to belong. This belief kept the system functioning. Yet beneath the order lay fatigue. Muscles ached daily. Joints wore down early. Hands cracked from cold and stone. Pain was not discussed, it was assumed. If someone slowed, others compensated. If someone fell ill, the community absorbed the loss. Briefly, because the work could not stop. Food depended on it. Storage depended on it. The state depended on it. Mourning also carried anxiety. Clouds were watched carefully. Wind direction noted. Frost feared. A single bad season could unravel everything. People worked knowing success did not guarantee safety, only continuity. The same fields, the same terraces, the same tasks. Over and over. This repetition shaped the mind. Days blurred together. Individual moments lost importance. What mattered was endurance across time. Festivals would come. Rest would come, but not now. Mourning belonged to labor. Even rituals fit around work. Small offerings before beginning, quiet words to the mountains, requests for stability, not abundance. People did not ask for more. They asked for enough, and they asked silently. As the sun climbed higher and higher, shadows shortened. Warmth arrived unevenly. Cold lingered in shade. Work continued. There was no sense of personal achievement, no celebration of effort, only completion. When a terrace wall held, when irrigation flowed, when animals were secured, these were quiet successes. The state recorded labor through systems people barely understood, quipus, counts, reports. But for ordinary people, proof of work was visible in the land itself. If the terraces stood, the work was done. If they failed, responsibility was shared, and punishment followed. So people worked carefully, together, without complaint. Mourning ended not with rest, but with transition. Food was eaten simply, often cold, often repetitive. Then work resumed in another form. The Inca mourning was not inspiring, it was stabilizing. It taught discipline, it erased excess, it trained bodies and minds to function within limits. This was the purpose. As the sun reached its highest point, effort slowed slightly, not because people were finished, but because energy had to be preserved. The day was long, and tomorrow would come just as early. In the Inca world, farming did not feel close to the earth, it felt close to the sky. Fields clung to mountainsides. Terraces stepped upward, cut patiently into stone. Below them, valleys. Above them, thin air and uncertainty. This was not farming for abundance, it was farming for survival. Every terrace represented labor already spent, stone carried uphill, soil held in place, water guided carefully through narrow channels. Nothing here was accidental. At this altitude, land could not be wasted. Flat ground was rare. Rain was unpredictable. Frost could arrive without warning. The earth gave, but only if treated correctly. People learned early that the land was not generous. It had to be managed, respected, watched constantly. Potatoes grew where little else could. Hundreds of varieties existed, each adapted to a specific height, a specific condition. Quinoa filled gaps where maize could not survive. Each crop belonged to a place. Planting was precise. Timing mattered more than effort. A mistake in season could erase a year's work. Calendars guided decisions. Rituals marked beginnings. Offerings were made, not for wealth, but for stability. People asked the mountains for restraint, not mercy. The terraces themselves were fragile. Walls cracked, water channels clogged, soil shifted slowly downhill. Maintenance never stopped. A single collapse could destroy fields below. One failure spread downward. So people worked carefully, together. Every stone placed with memory of previous seasons. Farming was communal. No one worked alone. Labor groups moved across terraces like a single body. Children carried small tools. Elders pointed out weaknesses. Adults bore the heaviest loads. There was no private harvest. Fields were divided by obligation. Part of the work fed the household. Part fed the Ayulu. Part fed the state and the gods. The land did not belong to individuals. It belonged to order. This reduced conflict. It also removed choice. A person could not decide to plant something different. Innovation was dangerous. Unfamiliar crops meant risk. Risk meant hunger. Food security depended on obedience. When harvests were good, surplus moved into state storehouses. Potatoes were freeze-dried into chuño. Grain was dried and packed carefully. These stores represented safety. They also represented control. In bad years, food was redistributed. Not always equally, not always in time. Hunger still happened. Terraces could not protect against drought, or relentless rain, or pests. When crops failed, there was no alternative livelihood, no trade to rely on, no savings. People endured lean seasons quietly. Rations shrank, meals simplified. Children felt it first. The body adapted. Energy was conserved. Movement slowed, but work did not stop. The state still demanded labor. Terraces still needed repair. Roads still needed maintenance. Farming existed under pressure from above and below. Above, the state. Below, the land. And both were unforgiving. There was pride in the terraces. They were proof of skill, of knowledge passed through generations. But pride did not reduce fatigue. Farming bent bodies early. Carrying loads uphill strained joints. Cold mornings stiffened muscles. Hands cracked and hardened. Pain became background noise. People measured success not by comfort, but by continuity. If the terraces held, if the crop grew, if the community survived another cycle, that was enough. There was beauty here, in the alignment of stone, in green lines cut across mountains, in the quiet order of fields at dawn. But beauty came with anxiety. Every cloud was watched, every frost feared, every delay questioned. Farming on the edge of the sky meant living close to failure. Yet people returned every morning. They planted again. They repaired again. They trusted repetition, not because they believed it would always work, but because there was no alternative. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched across terraces, work slowed. Tools were gathered, loads carried home. The land rested briefly. People did not celebrate. They prepared for tomorrow, because tomorrow would ask the same question again. Will the earth hold?
In the Inca world, food was never just food. It was security. Every meal represented work already done. Every stored portion represented fear delayed, not removed. People did not eat freely. They ate carefully.
The daily diet was simple: potatoes, quinoa, occasionally maize where altitude allowed, rarely meat. Meals were repetitive, familiar, predictable. This repetition was intentional. Variety was risky. New foods could fail. Old foods had proven themselves across generations. Potatoes stood at the center of survival. Hundreds of varieties existed, each suited to a specific height, a specific climate. People knew which survived frost, which endured drought, which lasted in storage. Knowledge of food was knowledge of life. Much of the day's effort went not into eating, but into preserving. Potatoes were freeze-dried into chuño, left outside during freezing nights, pressed underfoot, dried again under the sun. The process was slow, physical, unforgiving. Hands numbed, feet cracked from cold, breath burned in thin air. But the result mattered. Chuño could last for years. It could be carried, stored, redistributed. In the Inca world, preservation meant survival beyond the season. State storehouses, kulkas, rose above villages and along roads, built of stone, ventilated carefully, placed in cool, dry locations. They were visible reminders of order. Food flowed upward into these granaries, from households, from aylus, from fields worked collectively. In return, the state promised protection against famine. Sometimes it delivered. During shortages, food was released, distributed according to rank, need, and availability. Communities survived because of these reserves, but not always. Distribution depended on administration, on timing, on obedience. Some received enough, others received less. Some waited too long. Hunger did not disappear, it only changed form. When harvests failed, meals became smaller, less frequent, simpler. Children felt it first. Bodies weakened quietly. Energy faded. Growth slowed. Adults adapted by eating less, working through fatigue, conserving strength. Hunger was rarely dramatic. It was gradual, persistent, normal. No one spoke of it openly. To complain was to admit instability, and instability threatened order. Food shortages created anxiety beneath daily life. People watched the granaries. They counted sacks. They measured time until the next harvest. Trust in the system was tested silently. Food was not owned by individuals. It belonged to the structure, the state, the gods. This reduced hoarding. It also removed control. A family could not save extra for itself. Surplus was taken, redistributed elsewhere. This ensured collective survival. It also meant personal vulnerability. People lived one season ahead, rarely more. Festivals brought temporary abundance. Chicha flowed. Food was shared. Music returned. Then the moment passed. Discipline returned. Rations tightened. Storage resumed. Food was never wasted. Scraps were reused. Bones boiled. Leftovers dried. Every calorie mattered. Eating was not leisurely. It was functional, quiet, often done standing or seated close to the hearth. There were no long conversations over meals. Energy was reserved for work. Even cooking followed routine. Boiling, roasting, simple preparation. Taste mattered less than reliability. The state understood this. Predictability mattered more than pleasure. A population that ate the same way behaved predictably, moved predictably, worked predictably. Food became a tool of governance, but it also became a source of resilience. People learned to survive on little, to endure monotony, to function under scarcity. This endurance shaped the Inca world more than abundance ever could. As evening approached, fires burned low. Meals were smaller, quiet. People ate knowing that what remained mattered more than what was consumed. Tomorrow depended on it. Outside, the mountains held their silence, the granaries stood, the system waited. Food was stored, hunger was postponed, and life continued carefully. In the Inca world, work was not a choice, it was an obligation. The system was called mita, and it reached into every ordinary life. To belong to the empire meant to give your labor, not once, not occasionally, but regularly, predictably, without refusal. Men were called away from home. Women were assigned tasks inside communities. Children helped as soon as they were able. No one asked whether the timing was good. The work came when it came. Roads needed building. Terraces needed repair. Storehouses needed filling. Stone bridges needed rebuilding after floods. The state did not hire workers, it summoned them. Mita was framed as shared responsibility, a contribution to collective survival, a moral duty, and in many ways it worked. Roads stretched across mountains, storehouses filled with food. The empire functioned without money. But the cost was personal. When a man left for Mita labor, fields at home still needed care. Families adjusted. Neighbors absorbed the absence. Children carried heavier loads. The system relied on the Ayu to compensate. This strengthened communities. It also strained them. Mita labor was exhausting. Stone carried at altitude, terraces cut into frozen ground, roads maintained under sun, wind, and cold. Tools were simple. Hands bore the weight. In some cases, labor meant military service. Young men marched far from their valleys. Some never returned. Distance broke families quietly. There were no contracts, no wages, no negotiation. Work duration depended on state need, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. People learned not to ask how long. Refusal was not an option. Disobedience carried consequences: loss of status, loss of trust, punishment. But force was rarely visible. Control was internalized. People worked because everyone else worked, because expectation was shared, because resistance isolated you from the community. This made Mita powerful. The state did not need constant enforcement. People enforced it themselves. Children grew up seeing labor as destiny, not ambition, not achievement, just responsibility. There was pride in contributing, in seeing roads finished, in knowing the empire stood because of shared effort. But pride did not erase fatigue. Bodies wore down early. Injuries lingered. Illness slowed people who could not afford to slow. When someone collapsed, others stepped in. The work continued. Mita did not pause for grief. Food from state granaries sustained workers, but rations were basic, enough to continue, not enough to rest. Energy was measured carefully. The system valued output over comfort. In return, the state promised stability, protection from famine, order, and for centuries it delivered enough to survive. But it left little room for individual life. Personal plans were irrelevant. Desire did not shape days. The calendar did. Work followed seasons, followed commands, followed obligation. Freedom was not expected. Security was. For many, this trade felt acceptable. The mountains were harsh, isolation dangerous. Without structure, survival was uncertain. Mita reduced chaos, at a price. Some laborers were relocated permanently, sent to new regions, new climates, new communities. These relocations broke ancestral ties, separated families, replaced familiarity with control. The empire expanded. People adapted, silently. Work defined identity. A person was known by reliability, by endurance, by compliance, not by dreams. At night, workers slept near fires, bodies heavy, minds quiet. There was little energy left for reflection. Fatigue replaced thought. This, too, was part of the system. Exhaustion kept people obedient. In the Inca world, work was constant, but not chaotic. It moved with rhythm, with order, with repetition. This rhythm sustained the empire and consumed the individual. Yet people endured. They did not imagine alternatives. They perfected adaptation. They learned when to conserve strength, when to move, when to wait. Mita shaped lives from childhood to death, not as cruelty, but as structure, and structure in the Andes meant survival. As evening settled, labor ended for the day, not because the work was done, but because bodies could no longer continue. Tomorrow would call again, and people would answer.
In the Inca world, distance was never empty. It was organized. Stone roads cut across mountains, valleys, and ridges. They did not exist for comfort. They existed for control, obligation, and movement. These roads connected villages to storehouses, storehouses to centers, centers to power. They did not invite wandering. They directed it. People did not travel for curiosity. They traveled because they were required to. The road belonged to the state. Most ordinary people walked only short distances in their lives, from home to field, from village to terrace, from ayu to nearby shrine. Long journeys were rare and usually not voluntary. When people moved far, it was often because of mita labor or relocation or command. The roads made this possible. They were built by hand, maintained constantly. Stone fitted carefully without mortar, steps carved into steep slopes, drainage channels cut to protect paths from rain. This engineering was precise and unforgiving. A broken section could isolate entire regions. A collapsed bridge could stop food, labor, and messages. So maintenance never stopped. Workers repaired roads in cold wind, in rain, at altitude where breath was thin. The road demanded attention. Along these routes moved chasquis, runners trained to carry messages. They ran in relays, from station to station, passing words they could not read but had memorized. Their work was dangerous. Running at altitude strained the body. Falls were common. Injury ended service. But the messages moved. Information flowed faster than people. Orders arrived before preparation. Expectation arrived before consent. For ordinary villagers, this meant surprise, sudden summons, sudden demands. A runner could arrive, a message delivered, and life would shift. Men would leave for labor, food would be sent, people would relocate. Distance collapsed into immediacy. The roads erased isolation. They also erased refusal. Travel itself was harsh. People walked with loads. Llamas carried goods slowly uphill. Narrow paths allowed little margin for error. Weather changed quickly. Sun burned by day, cold cut by night. There were no inns, only simple shelters, stone structures where people rested briefly, shared space, minimal warmth. Sleep came lightly. Bodies remained alert. Night travel was avoided. Darkness hid cliffs. Spirits were believed to move freely. Silence felt heavy. Most movement stopped at sunset. Distance was measured in exhaustion, not miles. People learned to pace themselves, to conserve energy, to stop before collapse. Those who pushed too hard did not last. The roads also carried fear. Disease moved along them. Rumors spread. News of shortages or punishment traveled faster than help. A village could feel safe one day, threatened the next. The road connected, but it did not comfort. It reminded people they were part of something larger, something watching, something counting. Even those who never traveled far felt its presence. The road passed nearby, stone underfoot, silent, permanent, a reminder that the state could reach them. For some, the road represented opportunity, access to food, protection in famine, connection to festivals and ritual. For others, it represented loss, departure, separation, control. The same stone carried both meanings. Children watched travelers pass, runners appear and vanish.
Caravans of llamas move slowly uphill. They learned early that movement belonged to authority, not desire. To leave without permission was dangerous, suspicious, punishable. Staying put was safer. The Inca world was not static, it was tightly connected, but those connections served the system first. People adapted to this. They planned less. They waited more. Life unfolded locally. Decisions came from elsewhere. As evening approached, roads emptied. Footsteps faded. Wind moved through stone. The paths rested, but they never slept. Tomorrow, someone would walk them again, carrying labor, carrying orders, carrying change. Distance in the Inca world was never freedom. It was a line of responsibility stretching far beyond sight. In the Inca world, the body was never separate from work. It was shaped by it. From childhood, bodies learned the weight of stone, soil, and altitude. Muscles formed early, fatigue became familiar. Pain was not dramatic, it was ordinary. Clothing existed to protect the body, not to decorate it. Most people wore simple garments woven from llama or alpaca wool. The fibers were thick, rough, warm. Clothes were made to last. They were repaired again and again, stitches added, edges reinforced. New clothing was rare. For ordinary people, garments changed slowly over years, not seasons. A single tunic might be worn until it could no longer hold together. Status was visible in fabric quality, not in color or shape. Elites wore finer weaves, softer fibers, more careful patterns. Common people wore what was practical, heavy enough for cold nights, flexible enough for labor. Clothing was assigned by custom, often by the state. What you wore showed who you were allowed to be. There was little personal choice. Bodies endured the environment directly. Cold wind cut through valleys. Sun burned skin at altitude. Rain soaked wool and took days to dry. People worked anyway. Shoes were simple or absent. Feet hardened over time. Cuts and bruises were constant. Hands bore the clearest marks. Calluses from tools, cracks from cold, stains from earth. These signs were normal, they were expected. The body was proof of contribution. Illness disrupted this balance. A sick body could not work, could not fulfill obligation. This created fear. Without modern medicine, even small injuries could become serious. Infections spread. Fever weakened strength. Recovery was uncertain. People relied on herbs, compresses, rituals. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they did not. Pain did not stop labor unless it completely prevented movement. Most people continued despite discomfort. Endurance was not praised, it was required. Children learned this early. They watched adults work through exhaustion. They imitated posture, movement, rhythm. Girls learned weaving and carrying. Boys learned herding and fieldwork, but both learned effort. Bodies grew used to repetition, the same motions, the same paths. This repetition protected the system. Predictable labor meant predictable outcomes. A body that failed created gaps. Others had to compensate. So the community watched each other, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Rest existed, but it was brief, functional. Sleep came early, often fully clothed, near fire. Nights were cold, breath visible, wool pulled tight. Morning came quickly. Bodies, stiff from yesterday's work, arose again. Movement loosened joints. Pain faded into the background. Altitude never fully disappeared. Breathing remained shallow. Heart rate stayed higher. People adapted, but they never escaped it. Strength was local, specific. People were strong at what they did every day, weak outside those tasks. This made travel harder, change harder. The body learned one life. Aging arrived early, joints wore down, teeth eroded, eyes strained. Old age was respected, but not common. Those who reached it carried visible histories in their bodies: scars, bent posture, slower steps. They no longer worked heavily, but they advised, remembered, observed. Their bodies told stories without words. The Inca system depended on this physical reality, on people whose bodies could absorb strain, on communities that accepted this as normal. There was little space for rebellion in flesh. Exhaustion limited imagination. Yet within this endurance there was resilience. People knew their limits. They paced themselves, shared loads, adjusted effort. They survived not through comfort, but through familiarity. The body became a tool shaped by environment and obligation, not owned, but used. At dusk, work slowed. Bodies returned home. Wool brushed clean. Fire warmed muscles. Pain settled in, but it was known pain. Tomorrow would be the same, and the body would answer again. In the Inca world, endurance was not heroic. It was simply how life continued.
In the Inca world, expectation was learned early. It did not arrive suddenly. It grew quietly, through watching, through repetition, through correction. From childhood, people understood what was required of them, not through written rules, but through daily example. Children did not live apart from adult life. They lived inside it. They watched fields being worked. They carried small loads. They learned where to stand, when to be silent, and when to help. Play existed, but it often mirrored labor. Sticks became tools. Paths became practice. Childhood was short. Girls were expected to learn domestic and productive skills early: weaving, cooking, carrying water, caring for younger children. Their hands learned thread before softness. Their backs learned weight before rest. Boys were introduced to herding, farming, and construction. They followed older men, imitated movements, learned endurance. Expectation was gendered, but pressure was shared. No one grew up without obligation. Marriage came early, especially for girls, not as romance, but as integration into labor and lineage. A household needed workers. Children ensured continuity. Pregnancy was dangerous. Birth was risky. There was little medical help. Many women did not survive childbirth. Those who did returned to work quickly. Rest was brief, recovery incomplete. Loss was common, but life rarely paused for it. Women carried a heavy double burden: field work, domestic labor, and textile production. Weaving was constant, not decorative, essential. Clothing for the household, textiles for tribute, fabric for redistribution. Skilled weavers were valued, but the work was slow, repetitive, and physically demanding. Hours spent seated, hands moving endlessly, eyes focused, backs aching. Children often sat nearby, watching, learning. Motherhood did not reduce workload, it reshaped it. Children were carried while working, said between tasks, watched collectively. The Ayil absorbed some strain, but not all. If a woman became ill, the household suffered. If a child weakened, fear followed. Child mortality was high. Many children did not reach adulthood. This was known, expected, grieved quietly. Families learned not to show shock, only adjustment. Those who survived entered labor quickly, not because of cruelty, but because survival required contribution. Education was practical, memory-based, repetitive. Stories taught rules, rituals taught timing, observation taught behavior. Mistakes were corrected early, often gently, sometimes firmly. Disobedience was not encouraged.
Questioning disrupted order. Expectation shaped identity. People understood who they were by what they did, and what they did was rarely chosen. Freedom was not a central concept, belonging was. Children learned pride in contribution, in carrying weight, in being useful. This softened hardship, but it also normalized it. For women, expectation rarely ended. Even age brought new duties: advising, supervising, teaching. Older women held memory, patterns, knowledge of seasons and rituals, but their bodies carried pain, years of work embedded in joints and spine. There was respect, but not relief. For children, expectation meant early responsibility, early fatigue, early awareness of limits. Joy existed, but it was brief, tied to festivals, shared meals, moments of rest. Most days were similar. Expectation filled the space between waking and sleep. It shaped posture, speech, and movement. People learned not to stand out, not to demand, not to refuse. This created stability, but at a cost. Individual desire dissolved into routine. Ambition narrowed to endurance. Yet within this system, care existed. Families protected each other where they could. Communities shared loss. Neighbors helped in crisis. Expectation was heavy, but it was shared. At night, women gathered children close. Men rested near the fire. Silence settled. Tomorrow's work was already understood. No announcement needed. In the Inca world, expectation did not shout. It whispered, daily, until it became life itself.
In the Inca world, belief was not separate from life. It did not belong only to temples, and it did not appear only on special days. Belief lived everywhere, in stone, in wind, in the shape of mountains, in the rhythm of work. People did not ask whether they believed. They lived inside belief. Every mountain had presence. Every valley carried meaning. The great peaks were not scenery. They were apus, living spirits, watching, listening, remembering. People worked beneath them, walked under their gaze, and slept knowing they were never alone. This brought comfort and fear. Mountains protected communities, but they could also punish. A landslide, a storm, a failed harvest, nothing was random. Rain came from divine will. The sun warmed fields because it allowed them to live. Cold reminded people of limits. The most important god was Inti, the sun. Not distant, not abstract. Inti was daily, rising, warming, setting. Work followed the sun. Ritual followed the sun. Authority was justified through the sun. The ruler claimed descent from it, but ordinary people felt its power on their skin. Religion explained why things worked and why they failed. This mattered deeply. When crops grew, gratitude followed. When crops failed, fear grew. People did not blame systems. They blamed imbalance. A ritual missed, an offering forgotten, a mistake made. Religion became routine maintenance of the world. Small offerings happened often: food, drink, leaves, textiles. They were placed quietly, near stones, along paths, inside homes. Not dramatic, not loud. Every household participated. Illness was not only physical, it was spiritual disruption. A sick child meant something was wrong, a spirit offended, a balance broken. Healers worked with herbs, but also with prayer, with ritual movement, with spoken words. Healing tried to restore harmony, not eliminate symptoms. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. Death followed anyway. This did not destroy belief, it reinforced it.
Loss confirmed how powerful unseen forces were. Fear was part of faith. Certain days were dangerous, marked by calendars. People avoided travel, avoided major decisions. Time itself carried risk. A wrong action on a wrong day could invite disaster. This created constant attentiveness. Life required care, precision, respect. Ritual surrounded labor, before planting, before harvest, before major work. Even meta labor was ritualized. Work began with acknowledgement of spirits and ended with thanks. This gave meaning to exhaustion. People did not work only for the state, they worked to keep the world aligned. Sacred places existed everywhere, not only in large centers. A stone, a spring, a mountain face. Children learned which places were safe, which were dangerous, and which required silence. Night intensified belief. Darkness belonged to spirits. Movement slowed. Voices dropped. Fire protected. Light pushed back fear. People slept knowing unseen forces moved freely. Dreams mattered. They were messages, warnings, guidance. A bad dream stayed with a person all day, influencing behavior and shaping choices. Belief shaped emotion. It controlled anxiety, but also created it. When disasters happened, belief demanded response. Sometimes that response was sacrifice, rare, heavy, terrifying. Most people never witnessed it directly, but they knew it existed. Children were told stories, warnings, lessons. This reinforced obedience, caution, respect. Religion supported order. Order supported survival. Questioning belief was dangerous, not socially, cosmically. If the world fell out of balance, everyone suffered. So belief was shared, maintained together, carried quietly. There was beauty in this, connection, purpose. There was also pressure, fear of error, fear of offense. People lived carefully, not freely. At dusk, prayers softened the day. Offerings were placed, words whispered. Mountains darkened, stars emerged. The world felt watched, but also held. In the Inca world, belief did not promise comfort, it promised meaning. And for people living under constant strain, meaning was enough to continue. Ritual in the Inca world was not rare, it was constant. Most rituals were small, quiet, almost invisible. A handful of leaves, a sip of drink poured onto the ground, a whispered phrase before work. These moments held the world together. People did not wait for grand ceremonies. They marked life in fragments, day by day, task by task. Rituals gave structure to uncertainty. Before planting, hands paused. Before harvest, voices softened. Before long journeys, offerings were made. Even state labor began with ritual, not because it was sacred, but because it was dangerous. Work carried risk, so did weather, so did time itself. Ritual reduced fear by giving action. Most people experienced religion this way, through repetition, through habit. Large ceremonies existed, but they were distant, rare, heavy. People heard about them more than they saw them. They knew sacrifices happened. They did not speak of them easily. Sacrifice was not everyday life, but it cast a shadow over it. In times of crisis, drought, earthquakes, epidemics, ritual intensified. The world felt unstable. Something had gone wrong. Offerings increased, prayers grew urgent, and sometimes the ultimate offering was demanded. Capacocha ceremonies involved children, chosen carefully, prepared slowly. These children were treated with honor, fed well, dressed finely. This made it worse. They were sent far from home, up mountains, into cold. The journey itself was ritual, step by step, higher, quieter. Most ordinary people never witnessed the final act, but they knew the outcome. The mountain received the child. The world was balanced again. At least that was the belief. For families involved, the meaning was complex: pride, fear, grief, silence. Communities did not protest, they endured. Belief overrode emotion. Ritual violence was rare, but its existence shaped obedience. People followed rules carefully, they avoided mistakes, they respected calendars. Better caution than consequence. Silence played a role. Not everything was spoken, not everything needed explanation. Children learned when to be quiet, which places demanded stillness. Certain paths, certain stones, certain nights. Silence protected. After rituals, especially heavy ones, life returned to routine. Fields still needed care, animals needed feeding. The extraordinary dissolved back into the ordinary. This normalization was powerful. It allowed people to continue. Ritual also reinforced authority. The state controlled when ceremonies happened, who participated, what they meant. Religion justified power, power directed belief. Ordinary people did not separate the two. Order came from ritual, ritual came from authority. Breaking rules was not rebellion, it was danger. At night, after ritual days, fires burned low, voices stayed quiet, sleep was light. People felt the weight of what had been done. Yet morning still arrived. Sunlight returned, work resumed. The system endured because it absorbed shock. Fear was ritualized, loss was given meaning, pain was framed as necessity. This did not remove suffering, but it made it survivable. For most people, ritual was not about spectacle, it was about control, over fear, over chaos, over the unknown. Silence helped. Not asking questions, not demanding explanations, trusting that balance required sacrifice. This trust was learned early, passed down, repeated. In the Inca world, ritual was not emotional release, it was discipline, a way to keep going when answers were impossible. And so, after the offering, after the silence, after the long night, people returned to their lives. Fields, paths, stone walls. The world continued. In the Inca world, illness was never only illness. Pain did not arrive by accident, and sickness did not come alone. Every weakness carried meaning. Bodies worked hard, often too hard. From childhood, muscles were strained, lungs labored in thin air, skin cracked from cold and sun. Fatigue was constant. Pain became familiar. People learned to live inside it. There were no hospitals, no doctors in the modern sense. Healing belonged to the community, to elders, to healers, to ritual. Herbs were used, compresses applied, smoke inhaled, words spoken softly. Some treatments helped, others did nothing. People did not expect certainty. They expected effort. They expected attempt. Illness was understood as imbalance between body and spirit, between person and world. A fever meant something had shifted. A cough meant something was wrong beyond the lungs. Healers asked questions the body could not answer. What rule was broken? What spirit offended? What ritual missed? Healing sought to restore harmony, not to guarantee survival. This made sickness frightening. A simple wound could become fatal. Infection spread quickly. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria. Children were especially vulnerable. Many did not survive early years. Fever, diarrhea, weakness. Families learned not to expect survival. They hoped, but they prepared. Loss was common, frequent, quiet. Women faced particular risk. Pregnancy was dangerous. Birth happened at home, without surgical help. Some women survived, others did not. Communities adapted. Widowers were supported. Grandparents raised children. Life reorganized itself around absence. Death was not hidden. It lived near homes, near fields, near paths. Burials happened close to daily life. The dead remained part of the household, part of memory. This closeness softened fear, but it did not remove grief. Epidemics were the most terrifying. Diseases moved along roads, from village to village, faster than people could flee. Entire communities weakened at once. Work stopped, fields were neglected. Hunger followed illness. Illness followed hunger. The cycle tightened. People prayed more. They offered more. They obeyed more carefully. They believed disorder caused sickness, and sickness punished disorder. The arrival of new diseases, before and during early contact with outsiders, broke this understanding. People died even when rules were followed, even when rituals were correct. This created confusion, fear without explanation. But ordinary people had no way to stop it. They endured. Old age was rare. Those who reached it were respected, seen as survivors. Their bodies carried the marks of labor, bent backs, worn joints, scarred hands. Wisdom came from endurance, not comfort. Death was not dramatic. It was expected. People prepared quietly, through ritual, through acceptance. This did not make death easy. It made it normal. Night intensified vulnerability. Cold worsened illness. Fire had to be maintained. Fuel was precious. A sick person listened to wind through stone, to coughing in darkness, to silence waiting. Sleep came in fragments, between pain and prayer. Families stayed close, sharing warmth, sharing breath. Sometimes morning came, sometimes it did not. When death arrived, life adjusted. Fields still needed work. Children still needed care. The system allowed little pause. Grief was carried alongside labor. This was not cruelty. It was necessity. The Inca world did not protect people from fragility. It taught them to live inside it. Health was temporary, strength borrowed, time uncertain. What mattered was continuation. Community absorbed loss. Routine continued. The world stayed in motion. People did not ask why life was fragile. They accepted that it was. And still, they woke, worked, and endured.
Night in the Inca world did not arrive gently. It fell. The sun disappeared quickly behind the mountains. Light drained from the valleys. Cold followed immediately. There was no long twilight. Darkness was sharp, absolute, heavy. Fires were prepared before sunset. Fuel was precious. Flames stayed small. Light was guarded. Stone houses absorbed the cold. Walls held the day's warmth only briefly. Families gathered close. Bodies shared heat. Clothing stayed on. Sleep did not mean rest. It meant vulnerability. Outside, the mountains changed. Shapes vanished. Paths dissolved. Sounds traveled farther. Wind moved through terraces. Stones clicked. Animals shifted in darkness. Every sound carried meaning. People listened carefully. Night belonged to spirits, to ancestors, to forces unseen. Movement slowed, voices lowered. Children were warned not to wander, not to speak loudly, not to attract attention. Fire protected, silence protected. People believed spirits walked freely at night, especially in cold, especially during certain days. Calendars mattered even after sunset. Some nights were dangerous.
Some were safe. People knew the difference. Sleep was light, fragmented. Dreams were watched, remembered. A bad dream could shape the next day, change decisions, delay travel. Dreams were messages, not imagination. Cold intensified fear. Breath steamed. Hands stiffened. Bones ached. The sick suffered more at night. Pain sharpened. Coughing echoed in stone rooms. Families stayed awake longer when illness was present, listening, waiting. Death often came quietly at night, not announced, not dramatic. A breath did not return. Silence grew. Morning would bring ritual, but night held the moment alone. Outside, roads lay empty. Travel at night was avoided unless ordered. Even messengers rested. Darkness was not neutral. It was active. The state understood this. Night enforced obedience, stillness, containment. There were no lamps lining paths, no lights calling people outward. The world folded inward. Stars emerged clearly, sharp points against thin air. People recognized patterns, animals in the sky, stories repeated across generations. The Milky Way was not empty, it was alive. This brought comfort and reminder. The universe was close, watching. People fell asleep between alertness and exhaustion. Fully resting was risky, fully waking unnecessary. Sleep existed in layers. A noise could wake everyone, a shift in wind, a distant cry. Fear was not panic, it was readiness. Children learned this early. Night trained awareness. By the fire, elders whispered. Stories, warnings, memory. Not entertainment, instruction. The world was dangerous. Order kept it survivable. As hours passed, cold deepened. Fires dimmed. Bodies pressed closer. Breathing slowed. Gradually, exhaustion overcame vigilance. Sleep arrived. Not deep, but enough. Before dawn, some woke, checked the fire, listened again. The sun's return mattered. Morning restored safety, work, control. Night was endured, not enjoyed. In the Inca world, night reminded people of limits. No walls stopped cold, no authority ruled darkness. Only routine, belief, togetherness. When light finally returned, relief followed. Another day had been survived.
The Inca world did not survive because life was easy. It survived because people endured. Ordinary people did not shape history with decisions, they shaped it with repetition. Day after day, season after season, year after year. They woke early, worked without choice, followed rules older than themselves, not because they dreamed of empire, but because survival required it. Freedom was not the goal, stability was. Most people did not travel far, did not choose their work, did not question authority. They belonged to land, to ayu, to obligation. This limited them, and it protected them. The system was strict, often harsh, but it organized food, stored grain, moved labor where it was needed. Without it, many would not have survived the mountains. Life was narrow, but it was predictable. People knew what was expected, when to work, when to stop, when to offer thanks. Meaning replaced choice. Beauty existed in small moments. Warm sun on stone, shared food by the fire, quiet laughter in the evening. These moments mattered more than ambition. Pain was constant, cold, hunger, loss. Yet people adapted.
Bodies hardened, minds adjusted. Children learned early, adults endured silently, elders carried memory. This endurance was not heroic, it was necessary. The empire rested on this quiet strength. When disasters came, drought, disease, conflict, ordinary people absorbed the impact. They lost children, homes, fields, and still they rebuilt, still returned to terraces, still repaired walls, still followed ritual, not because they believed collapse was impossible, but because routine was the only answer they had. In the end, the system broke, not in one moment, but slowly. Pressure accumulated, climate shifted, disease arrived. The empire could not hold everything together anymore. But even as structures failed, people continued. They adapted again, as humans always do. The mountains remained, terraces remained, ways of life survived beyond the empire. What endured was not power, it was habit, community, knowledge of survival. When we look back, it is easy to judge, to measure freedom, to count suffering. But for those who lived there, life was not a comparison, it was simply life. They did not ask for more, they asked for enough. Enough food, enough warmth, enough balance to reach morning. And most days they did. As night returns to the Andes, fires dim, cold settles, families gather close, breathing slows. The world grows quiet again. Mountains watch, stars hold steady. Another day has passed, another has been endured. And now, as we leave this world behind, you can let it rest. You do not need to carry its weight. You do not need to stay alert. The work is done. The fire is low. The night is calm. Thank you for walking slowly through this ancient world. Thank you for listening, for staying. If these quiet journeys bring you peace, you may return whenever you wish. For now, rest your body, ease your thoughts, and let sleep come gently. Good night.